Chester RP Church Devotional Podcast. Clint Davis, your host. Thanks for being with us. Psalm 23. All right, well, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We joined together to read God's Word. We're going to pick this story up in Ruth, the story of Ruth. We just finished Jonah yesterday, another 4-chapter book that has a wonderful story and wonderful meaning. Ruth chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, a story that is set during the days of the judges. Here we go, verse 1 of Ruth 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraithites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Man, this story begins in a very tragic way. Ruth's got a unique story arc. It's actually a really great story arc. It starts with just a tragedy of beyond understanding. There's famine in the land, which was not uncommon in those days, the days in which she lived, particularly as the author tells us when the judges ruled Israel. The judges were a period of time. The judges ruled during a period of time where the people of God simply did what was right in his or her own eyes. The last of the book of Judges says that in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his or her own eyes. And as such, they disobeyed God. They walked away from the Lord, and they had to deal with consequences of their actions. The consequences of their actions was that God brought retribution upon them for their poor faithfulness, for their lack of faithfulness and their poor decisions, and their failure to walk in obedience with him. One of the ways in which God brought retribution on them was by shutting up the heavens, bringing famine on the land, bringing a drought that then didn't produce food, and then everyone was hungry. And so, during this time, one of these periods of famine, Elimelech and his wife Naomi were in Bethlehem, and they left Bethlehem and went to the country of Moab. Now, for those of us just reading the story, it makes perfect sense to do that, right? If you're just reading the story and you're thinking about, well, there was no food where they were looking for food, so they became, in a sense, refugees, and they were forced out of their homeland because of famine, so they're going to go somewhere to find food. Now, we talk a lot about that in our society today in the modern world. Refugees being forced out of their homes to go and find safety or asylum or food or shelter or whatever. And so we have a lot of compassion for people like that. And so when you first read this, you think, with some, you kind of look at them with compassion. But it's important to remember that when the Bible tells this story, it's really not an attack, but it's really a startling statement about their lack of faithfulness. In the period of Judges, everyone did what was right in his or her own eyes. There's famine in the land. There's retribution for the disobedience. Now, instead of trusting the Lord and staying where God has promised to provide food and water and blessing, they choose to leave that land and go to the land of their enemies, into a foreign land, pursuing their own will, pursuing their own desire, pursuing their own things to find food their own way. And that's important for us to keep in mind. Bethlehem literally means house of bread, and it is in the land of Judah, in the land of Israel, in the promised land where God has specifically prepared and God has specifically promised to take care of his people. These people, this family, Elimelech and Naomi, and their 2 sons, leave the land of God's promised provision to go to a foreign land where God has promised to not provide for his people. They choose to do their own thing, and when they leave, they go into the land of Moab. And so they're reflective of the spirit of the day. We're going to do it the way we want to do it. And they go into Moab, and while they're there, poor Naomi loses her husband and both of her sons, and the sons take Moabite women. So at the conclusion of verse 5, you have 3 women who are widows. You have Naomi, you have Orpah, and you have Ruth. Just a tragic beginning to this story. It's a helpful story. It's a helpful place to start because it reminds us of the consequences of sin. It also reminds us how God in the story, and I'll go ahead and tell you what's coming if you don't know the story, God will redeem Ruth and Naomi. Now, it takes us a while to get to that point, and he will make their sorrow turn to joy, their mourning turn to dancing. And we will see that at the conclusion, but it's the start that reminds us, even when we mess up, even when we create a royal mess, as it were, God can put our lives back together through his grace and use it to advance his kingdom and for the good of his people. And so we give God praise for that. We trust him. But this first lesson, I think, from the book of Ruth is stay where God's called us to be. Same thing with Jonah. Stay in the will of God. Even though it may not appear that you're enjoying the blessings of God, stay there, because I can promise you when you go outside of it, you will indeed suffer the consequences of your decisions. Take care. God bless you. Trust Christ. Thank God for the provision he's given to us in him. See you tomorrow.